Hi guys, Charlie here and welcome back to my vlog. During today's video we will look to analyse two different weight room movements and compare two athletes in each movement. One athlete will lack the skill required to perform the task, while the other athlete will have a lack of capacity. In these examples, one athlete will lack the joint mobility to perform the task and one athlete will lack the force capacity required to perform the movement optimally. Here we can see an athlete performing a back squat in the sagittal plane. We can see that this athlete fails to reach a depth sufficient of her femur becoming parallel to the ground. We also observe a slight raise in the heel when trying to obtain this depth. She seems to have developed a forward lean as a compensatory mechanism to keep her body balanced and avoid falling backwards. Here we can see the same athlete performing a regression of the back squat. When performing this pole squat, we can see her torso remains much more upright, as she no longer requires a forward lean to keep herself balanced due to the support from the pole. When analysing in more detail, we can see an ankle angle of 65 degrees while in the squat. This indicates a dorsiflexion of 25 degrees, and according to Brad Schoenfeld, normal dorsiflexion range is between 0 and 20 degrees, therefore ankle mobility doesn't seem to be a problem with this athlete. During the back squat, a knee flexion angle of 74 degrees is observed. Logically, when the hips sink deeper, there will be a greater flexion at the knee, as we can see here from the pole squat. Interestingly, when observing the hip angle between the two movements, they are within 1 degree. We have seen that this athlete displays the joint mobility and range of motion to perform a back squat. However, she is inexperienced in this movement and has not mastered the skill yet. We have seen that she has adopted coping strategies which lie outside the optimal technical model. If we look at this athlete performing a back squat, we can see that he adopts some similar coping mechanisms to the previous athlete. We can observe a forward trunk lean to assist in keeping balance and a shift in the centre of mass in the foot towards the toes at the bottom of the movement, causing his heels to raise up from the floor. This video shows the athlete now performing a pole squat. We can observe that the athlete again attains greater squat depth and thus greater knee flexion by using the pole as a counterbalance. However, in this instance, we can see the athlete chooses to go into lumbar flexion in order to achieve this parallel depth. This lumbar flexion appears to be a coping mechanism due to a lack of hip mobility. By allowing his spine to go into flexion, he has opened out the hip joint and therefore the hip is not required to flex as much as would otherwise be required. We can observe that the athlete has a dorsiflexion angle of 5 degrees in the back squat, which lies within the normal parameters highlighted by Schoenfeld. Thus, the primary aspect to work on that would allow a more optimal squatting pattern would be the hip mobility, and consequently learning how to rebalance himself in the squat with an altered technique due to the greater mobility. If it was deemed necessary to load this athlete, it could be useful to raise his heel either by using weightlifting shoes or by putting plates underneath his heels to ensure there was an even weight distribution in the sole of the foot. Also, I would ensure the athlete had a strong brace position for the movement and that he was utilising the Valsalva manoeuvre to ensure there was no spinal flexion present to help avoid injuries. By utilising these tools, this can allow loading of the movement in a quarter or half squat while simultaneously working on hip mobility. I would also suggest adding some gluteal work in the gym program, as this muscle activation would be limited due to the short range of the squats. In contrast, athlete 1 would have the most benefit by working on her balance and control in the squatting pattern. She should work on simultaneous triple flexion in the movement to help maintain this balance and maintain an optimal squatting pattern. It is likely that a wider foot placement may help her due to her long femur length. We will now move on to the second movement and analyse a skill and capacity limitation between two athletes during the power clean. Here we have athlete number 1. He has 6 years of gym training history, however, he states that he has not had a strength and conditioning coach before now. If we look to break down the movement, we can see that the athlete adopts a good initial lifting position. However, when he initiates the lift, there is prominent movement in his hip and shoulder alongside some lumbar flexion prior to any bar displacement, and it could be deduced that he has failed to take up the tension in the bar prior to commencing the lift. We can see that this athlete has adopted a one-pull strategy, a common fault with athletes lacking the required skills, and as a result, at the top of what would be the first pull, we can see there is a prominent knee bend. This leads into the triple extension aspect of the lift, and we can see that he still has some flexion in his lower limb, predominantly in the knee and the hip, therefore reducing his ability to produce force. If we look at this video, we can see the same athlete loading a trap bar to perform a jumping movement. We can see here that he produces a much smoother and safer movement pattern when compared to the power clean. This athlete should work on the technical breakdown of his power clean and work on his first pull, the scooped transition, and the second pull in isolation, as well as linking them together. I would suggest working from the top position of the first pull and train from this hang position in order to work on the transition and the triple extension of the second pull. It is clear that this movement pattern is being reinforced over the last 6 years of training and therefore will take some time to correct. Encouraging him to get his hips through the bar from the hang position is a useful cue for him, and loading the bar to a weight that he is unable to upright row would be a useful constraints-based approach to try and help him learn the movement pattern himself. For this intervention to work, it would be important to use a less complex derivative of the clean, such as the hang clean, and ensure that he is braced through his core and his midline. If we take a look at this final athlete, in contrast to the previous one, we can see a much smoother movement with a clear two-pull strategy. At the top of the first pull, we can see a much more extended knee position with latissimus dorsi engaged and shoulders in front of the bar. As we move the video forwards through the transition phase to the top of the second pull, the athlete has transitioned the bar to allow for the greatest power production and produce full triple extension at his ankle, knee and hip, as we can see from the kinematic joint analysis. This is in sharp contrast to the previous athlete. Although this athlete is fairly competent at completing the skill, if we go back to the start of the first pull, we can see there is some noticeable hip displacement before any bar displacement is observed, creating a more hip dominant movement than desired. It would appear that the athlete is a hip dominant and seems to lack the force capacity anteriorly around the knee joint. Cues such as screw your feet into the floor and push the floor away from you will be useful for this athlete to ensure maximal activation of quadriceps and gluteus maximus, the two prime movers in the first pull. Thanks for tuning in. Hopefully you have enjoyed the video and it has helped to highlight limitations in skills and capacities in the weight room and also how to combat these problems. Until next time, goodbye.